The rain hit the financial district like thrown gravel, blurring the neon lights of the city into jagged streaks of blue and gold. I stood by the elevators, my reflection in the polished chrome looking tired and drained. My name is Leo Vance. I'm 26 years old, and I was currently the only person left on the 14th floor of Hale Enterprises. I had stayed late to finish compliance reports, dry, exhausting documents that no one would ever thank me for. I had even skipped dinner with my younger brother, a sacrifice that stung because I rarely saw him, just to cover a shift for a coworker who had called in sick. As I turned to grab my bag, I glanced through the massive glass wall of the executive suite. There she was. Veronica Hale, the CEO known in every business journal as the Ice Queen, was bent over her mahogany desk. She wasn't reviewing a merger or firing a subordinate. Her shoulders were shaking with heavy, silent sobs. It was 10 p.m., the office was a tomb, and the most untouchable woman in the industry was falling apart right in front of me. I should have walked away. I should have pressed the down button and forgotten I ever saw it. But I didn't. Everyone in the corporate world feared Veronica Hale. She moved through boardrooms like a sharpened blade, cutting through weak arguments and indecision without a second thought. She was marble, cold, expensive, and impossible to break. But tonight, the marble had finally cracked. As I stood frozen in the hallway, I saw that her perfect, terrifying composure had vanished. Her mascara had surrendered, leaving dark tracks down her pale cheeks. She didn't notice me. She was staring at her phone, which was sitting on the desk on speakerphone. Amon's voice filled the room, sounding smooth, cultured, and utterly chilling. "Tomorrow night, Veronica," the voice said, dripping with a predatory sort of calm. "You show up to the gala alone. You smile, you do exactly as I say, or I show everyone the old photos from the beginning. I'll show them how you really started this empire." The line went dead with a soft click, leaving the office in a suffocating silence. Veronica didn't move. She just stared at the device as if it were a poisonous snake. I realized then that the Ice Queen wasn't cold by choice. She was frozen in fear of a ghost from her past. Logically, I knew I should have turned around and vanished into the rainy night. Getting involved with the personal trauma of a billionaire CEO was a one-way ticket to a fired and blacklisted career. Yet my feet moved toward the glass door before my brain could stop them. I knocked softly, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the empty suite. Veronica jumped, her head snapping up. For a second, the Ice Queen returned. Her eyes flashed with a lethal defensive fury that made me want to bolt. She was exposed, and she hated it. She quickly wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, but the damage was done. We stood there in a long, stretching silence, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound between us. I waited for her to scream at me, to demand my resignation, or to tell me to get out. Instead, she took a shaky breath and pointed toward the heavy oak door. "Close the door, Leo," she said, her voice raspy but gaining its edge back. "If you heard that voicemail, you're already involved. Sit down. We need to talk about what happens tomorrow." Veronica didn't waste time with pleasantries once the door was shut. She explained the nightmare. The voice on the phone belonged to Victor Cade, her former fiancé. He wasn't just an ex, he ran a massive logistics empire that everyone whispered had deep, organized crime ties. Victor was attending a high-profile charity board gala the following evening, and he planned to use the event as a stage for her execution. He had distorted evidence and old photos from the very start of her career, items he had manipulated to look like she had built her success on fraud and theft. "He wants to humiliate me publicly," she whispered, her hands gripping the edge of the desk so hard her knuckles were white. "He wants to strip away my reputation before he takes the company. He thinks I'm alone." She looked at me then, really looked at me, with a desperation that bypassed our job titles. "I need you to attend the gala with me, not as an employee, but as my partner. I can't walk into that room letting him think I'm vulnerable. Just one night, Leo, that's all I'm asking." I sat back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had spent my entire life trying to be the clean guy. I followed the rules, I filed my compliance reports, and I stayed out of the shadows. I told her I couldn't do it. I hated deception, and I wasn't an actor. I was a data analyst who valued the truth above everything else. I didn't want to be a pawn in a rich man's game of social chess. Veronica didn't argue. Instead, she offered a pact. "No dirty tricks, Leo," she promised, her voice steadying. "We will set strict rules, no lies beyond the simple appearance of us being together. No cruelty, no games. I just need your presence, your integrity, to keep me grounded when he starts his performance." She was offering a deal based on honor, not manipulation. Against every survival instinct I possessed, I found myself nodding. I knew Victor Cade's type, the kind of man who used fear as a currency. My father had raised me to stand up to bullies, even the ones in silk suits. "One night," I agreed. "But we do it through the truth, or I walk away." The next evening, we were in the back of a black town car, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows like a fever dream. We were rehearsing our story, but the air was thick with genuine tension. To pass the time and settle our nerves, we started talking, really talking. I told her why I was so obsessed with compliance and ethics. I revealed that my father had lost his small trucking company years ago because he refused to falsify shipping manifests for a local boss. He chose poverty over a lie, and I had watched that choice break our family's finances but save our souls. Veronica listened in total silence, her expression softening. Then she shared her own scar. Her first startup partner hadn't just left, he had vanished with all the investor money, leaving her to take the legal and social blame for his theft. She had spent years clawing her way out of that hole, which was why she was so protective of her image now. We were two people from different worlds, but we carried the same burn marks from people who thought they could play God with other people's lives. The gala was held in a ballroom that smelled of expensive perfume and old money. When we entered, the room seemed to go quiet for a heartbeat. Veronica was a vision in midnight blue, her Ice Queen mask firmly back in place, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Then, the crowd parted and Victor Cade arrived. He didn't walk, he prowled. He was smiling like polished brass, wealthy, charming, and radiating a predatory calm that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He looked like the kind of man who had never been told no in his entire life. He made a beeline for us, ignoring the other dignitaries and board members. He didn't lower his voice as he reached us. Instead, he greeted Veronica loudly enough for the surrounding circle to hear. "Veronica, darling, you look stunning," he said, his eyes flicking to me with dismissive contempt. "But I have to ask, are you still pretending you built this entire empire all alone? Or are you finally ready to admit whose shoulders you stood on to get to the top?" The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The polite chatter died down, replaced by a sharp, hungry curiosity. Board members began to circle closer, and donors slowed their walks to listen. Victor was a master of the social arena. He didn't make a direct accusation, he just planted seeds of doubt. He began to imply, with practiced ease, that Veronica had stolen the early capital for Hale Enterprises from his own family's holdings. "It's a shame, really," he said to a nearby group of investors, his voice carrying perfectly. "The public sees a self-made woman, but the ledgers tell a story of creative acquisition." Murmurs began to spread like a virus through the ballroom. I saw a few people pull out their phones, and I knew that within minutes, this scandal would be trending. Veronica's hand tightened on my arm until it hurt. I could feel her reputation trembling under the weight of his smug lies. He was trying to provoke her into an emotional outburst, something that would make her look guilty and unstable in front of the people who held her company's future in their hands. Veronica opened her mouth to defend herself, but I could see the tremor in her chin. She was too close to the pain to speak clearly. I knew this was the moment I had to step up. I moved slightly in front of her, breaking Victor's intense stare. I kept my voice steady, projecting it with the calm authority of someone who dealt in facts, not theater. "Mr. Cade," I said, catching the attention of the surrounding board members. "If you actually had proof of these claims, you would have filed a legal motion in a courtroom where it matters. You wouldn't be performing a cheap stunt at a charity gala." The room shifted. I saw a few board members nod in agreement. I looked him dead in the eye and added, "The truth doesn't need a spotlight and a microphone to be real. Only lies need this much production value." For a second, Victor's mask slipped, and a flash of genuine rage crossed his face. Then, from a corner of the room, someone started to applaud. It was a senior partner from a major law firm. Soon, more people joined in and the tension broke. Victor's eyes darkened, but his smile returned, wider and sharper than before. He looked like a cat that had just cornered a mouse. "Oh, Leo, is it? You're very brave," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "But you're wrong about one thing. I didn't just come here to talk." He reached into his tuxedo jacket and produced a folded set of documents, a pending civil complaint stamped by the High Court. "I did file it," he announced, holding the papers up for the room to see. "And I've named the specific offshore accounts and the dates of the transfers. This isn't a performance. It's an eviction notice for your CEO." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Veronica went deathly pale, her grip on my arm loosening as if all the strength had left her body. I felt a cold pit form in my stomach. This wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was a legal reality. Victor leaned in close to us, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "I told you, Veronica, I'm going to take everything." For a moment I actually thought it was over. We had walked right into his trap. The rest of the gala was a blur of hostile stares and whispered judgments. We managed to retreat to a secluded balcony, the cold night air hitting us like a physical blow. Veronica leaned against the stone railing, her head in her hands. "It's real," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The filing is real, Leo." I asked her how that was possible if she was innocent. She looked at me with hollow eyes and explained that the complaint was based on forged partnership amendments from a decade ago. "He's using documents that look like I signed over shares I never owned," she said. "I knew they were fake the moment I saw the copies months ago, but I've never been able to prove who forged them or when it happened. He spent years burying me in a thick fog of paperwork and legal technicalities." She looked defeated, the weight of a 10-year-old lie finally crushing her. "He's won, hasn't he? He has the signatures, and I have nothing but my word." She looked out at the city she had helped build, sounding like she was saying goodbye to it. "No," I said, my mind starting to weir with the logic of my day job. "He hasn't won yet." I wasn't a lawyer, but I was a compliance expert. I knew how regulatory audit systems worked, and I knew that in the digital age, a signature on a piece of paper was only half the story. "Veronica, I need you to get me into the original digital archives of those years," I told her, my voice gaining energy. "Not the printed copies he showed the court, but the raw server data from the firm that handled your first startup." She looked at me, confused. "What are you looking for?" I explained that something about the timestamps on the documents Victor had flashed earlier had bothered me. They looked too clean, too perfect for a decade-old filing. "Every digital file leaves a trail," I told her. "If those documents were forged, the metadata, the hidden history of the file, will show us the truth. Paper can lie, but the code usually remembers." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll get you the access. But we only have until the board meeting tomorrow morning." We went back to the office, the very place where this had started 24 hours earlier. While the rest of the world slept, I dove into the digital guts of a defunct law firm's server. It was grueling work, sifting through thousands of lines of encrypted logs and old emails. But then, at 4 a.m., I found it. I pulled up the metadata for the alleged partnership amendments. The smoking gun wasn't a hidden letter or a secret recording. It was a timestamp. The records showed that the files had been edited and backdated nearly 6 years after the alleged signing date. Even more incriminating, the digital signature on the edits belonged to a high-level IT administrator inside Victor Cade's own logistics firm. Someone on his payroll had reached back in time to alter the records. It was legal, provable, and incredibly clean. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a deliberate, coordinated fraud. I sat back in my chair, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my tired eyes. We didn't just have a defense. We had a counterattack. We had the truth, and it was written in the one language Victor couldn't manipulate: data. The emergency board session was called for 9 a.m. the next morning. The room was packed with the most powerful people in the company, all of them looking at Veronica with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Victor Cade was there too, sitting at the far end of the table, looking incredibly confident. He probably thought he was there to witness the final blow. Veronica stood at the head of the table, her face calm and her posture perfect. She didn't lead with an emotional plea. Instead, she turned the floor over to me. I stepped up to the projector and began to present the audit chain I had discovered. I didn't use flowery language or make wild accusations. I simply showed them the metadata. I showed them the exact moment Victor's firm had accessed the archives and changed the dates on the amendments. This isn't an opinion, I told the board, my voice echoing in the silent room. This is a record of a crime. The documents Mr. Cade is using to sue this company were manufactured by his own employees 3 years ago. The board members began to lean forward, their eyes darting between the screen and Victor. You could feel the air leaving the room. But Victor Cade didn't crumble. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he let out a short, dry laugh. A fascinating technical theory, Leo, he said, leaning back and crossing his legs. But I have no idea what my IT department does in their spare time. If there was a mistake in the records, it was likely the work of a disgruntled associate who is, unfortunately, now deceased. He had a backup lie ready, a classic fall guy defense that was just plausible enough to create a legal stalemate. He looked around the room, and I saw the doubt creeping back into the board members' faces. It was his word against our data, and in the world of high finance, a dead associate was a very convenient ghost to blame. The room divided again, with some demanding an immediate investigation and others suggesting Veronica step down until it was resolved. It looked like we had hit a wall. The board decided to adjourn for 2 hours to consult with their own legal teams. As the room cleared, the tension remained like a physical weight. Victor walked past us, whispering, "Nice try, kids, but metadata doesn't put people in handcuffs." Once he was gone, Veronica pulled me into her private office. She looked exhausted, but the fear was gone. "Thank you, Leo," she said softly. "You did enough. You showed them he's a liar, even if they're too afraid to act on it yet." She reached out and squeezed my hand. "You saved my dignity, and that's worth more to me than the company." It felt like an ending. We had fought the good fight, exposed the villain, and reached a draw. I started to pack up my laptop, feeling a strange sense of peace despite the looming disaster. But the story wasn't over. As I was walking toward the door, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number from a local area code. It wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of the second act. The caller was a man named Arthur Vance, no relation to me, a retired regulatory auditor who had seen the news of the board leak on a financial blog. "I saw the name Victor Cade," the man said, his voice thin and shaky. "And I saw the mention of timestamp discrepancies. He told me that 10 years ago, he had been part of a small team investigating similar fraud patterns tied to several of Victor's smaller trucking subsidiaries." "We were shut down before we could file the final report," Arthur whispered. "The pressure came from way up the chain, but I kept my notes. I kept the original digital signatures from those cases." He offered to meet me in a park 2 blocks away. I realized then that Victor hadn't just forged one document to hurt Veronica. He had built his entire empire on a foundation of digital ghosts and altered history. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern of behavior that spanned a decade. When I met Arthur, he handed me a weathered flash drive. "Everything is on here," he said, looking over his shoulder as if he expected Victor's men to appear from the trees. Back at the office, I plugged it in, and the twist cascade truly began. The drive contained evidence that multiple shell companies under Victor's control had used the exact same digital edit signatures to alter their financial records. It was a fingerprint. We didn't just have one forged document anymore. We had proof of a systematic, long-term conspiracy to defraud investors and regulators. This was pattern evidence, and unlike the single file from the board meeting, this was admissible in a criminal court. It wasn't just a corporate dispute anymore. This was lawful dynamite. If we used this, we wouldn't just be defending Veronica's reputation. We would be blowing up Victor's entire world. I showed it to Veronica, and for the first time, I saw a look of pure, cold justice in her eyes. "He wanted a fight," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Let's give him one he can't survive." However, there was a massive catch. Using this evidence meant taking it to the public authorities, which would trigger a massive federal investigation into the entire sector. "If we go public with this, the stock price will crater," I warned her. The board will panic, and they might remove you just to distance themselves from the scandal. You might lose control of Hale Enterprises temporarily, or even permanently. It was a staggering personal risk. She could keep the evidence secret and try to settle with Victor privately to save her job, or she could do the right thing and risk everything she had built. Veronica didn't hesitate for more than a second. She looked at the photo of her first startup partner on her desk, the one who had been blamed for another man's greed. "I'm done hiding from the truth," she said firmly. "My father always said sunlight is the best disinfectant. If the company falls because we told the truth, then it wasn't built on solid ground anyway. We're going to the hearing." 2 weeks later, we were in a sterile, high-stakes public hearing room. The air was thick with the scent of floor wax and tension. I was called as the primary witness to testify about the data trail. As I sat in the witness chair, I saw Victor Cade sitting in the front row, his high-priced attorneys flanking him like a wall of dark wool. He wasn't smiling anymore. Under oath, I walked the committee through the metadata, the shell companies, and the decade-long pattern of fraud. My voice was calm and precise. I didn't use theatrics or emotional appeals. I let the numbers do the talking. Victor's lead attorney tried to intimidate me, shouting about unauthorized access and speculative theories, but I didn't bend. I had the truth on my side, and for a guy who grew up watching his father lose everything for a manifest, this felt like the moment I had been born for. Every time the lawyer tried to trip me up, I simply pointed back to the encrypted logs. You can't cross-examine a timestamp. The real trap door opened in the final hour of the hearing. One of the committee members, a sharp-eyed woman who specialized in forensic accounting, asked for a specific cross-reference of the IP addresses used for the edits. As the data appeared on the large monitors in the room, it became clear that the final approval for the altered filings hadn't come from a dead associate or an anonymous IT room. The forensic review linked the fraud directly to a private server registered to Victor Cade's personal residence. He hadn't just known about it. He had personally authorized and overseen the alterations from his own study. It wasn't a subordinate's mistake. It was his direct hand on the scale. The room went completely silent as the realization sank in. Victor's attorney leaned over to whisper something to him, but Victor just stared at the screen, his face finally draining of all color. The predatory calm was gone, replaced by the look of a man who realized he had just walked into his own cage. The collapse happened with the weight of lawful gravity, not the explosions of a movie. Because the evidence was so overwhelming, the fallout was swift. The charges weren't just a dramatic arrest. They were a systematic dismantling of his life. There were massive civil fines that wiped out his liquidity. There was a permanent disbarment from ever holding an executive role in a public company. Investor lawsuits began to pile up like a landslide, and within 48 hours, Victor's logistics empire began to crack. He wasn't being taken away in chains, not yet. But he was being erased from the world of power he loved so much. He had tried to use the law as a weapon against an innocent woman, and instead, the law had turned into a mirror, reflecting his own crimes back at him until he had nowhere left to hide. As we walked out of the hearing room, I saw him sitting alone on a wooden bench, looking small for the first time in his life. Back at the office, the atmosphere was electric. The board had been forced to reinstate Veronica with full powers, realizing she was the only one with the integrity to lead them through the coming reform. She called me into her office, but this time, the glass door was open. "Leo," she said, looking at me with a strange expression, "there's one more thing you need to know." She revealed that she had actually prepared a promotion for me weeks ago, before the gala, but she had held it back. "I was unsure if I could trust anyone in this building," she admitted. "I thought everyone was either a spy for Victor or just waiting for me to fail. I was wrong about you. I thought you were just a good employee, but you're actually the bravest person I've ever met." She pushed a folder across the desk. It wasn't just a raise, it was the position of Chief Compliance Officer. "I need someone who doesn't just follow the rules, but who believes in them," she said. I looked at the folder, then back at her. I told her I would accept the role on one condition: transparency reforms had to become the hard-coded policy of the company. No more Ice Queen secrets, no more hidden archives, and no more protecting the brand at the expense of the truth. Veronica didn't just agree. She called an immediate all-hands meeting in the lobby. In front of hundreds of employees, she announced the changes and credited the unlikely pact we had made for saving the firm. The employees, who had lived in fear of her for years, actually cheered. It wasn't just about the company's survival. It was about the fact that the culture of fear was finally dying. Reputation was being rebuilt not on PR spin or expensive gala appearances, but on sunlight. As I stood there beside her, I realized that we had both changed. She wasn't an untouchable statue anymore, and I wasn't just a guy hiding in the night shift. We were both finally standing in the light. A few weeks later, it was late again. I was finishing up some paperwork in my new office when I walked past the executive suite. The rain was hitting the glass again, but the air felt different. Lighter, somehow. Veronica wasn't crying tonight. She was sitting at her desk, but she was laughing softly over a box of takeout noodles she was sharing with me. We weren't rehearsing for a gala or looking for digital signatures. We were just two people, rewriting the company's ethics policy drafts and talking about the future. The power remained, but the armor had changed. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. We still had lawsuits to settle, stocks to stabilize, and a lot of hard work ahead of us. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly hadn't been painless. But it was real. And as my father always taught me, the real things are the only ones that actually hold when the storm hits. I'm Vance, and I'm glad I didn't walk away.